Have you ever felt invisible to the one person who's supposed to see you most? Amelia thought she had it all figured out. Killing it at work, maintaining the picture-perfect marriage, checking all the boxes society tells us matter. But behind closed doors, she was drowning in a silence so heavy it could crush bones. Her husband, Ethan, had become a stranger sharing her bed, and she'd convinced herself she was the only one suffering. Then one ordinary Wednesday, her phone buzzed with a voice message that wasn't meant for her. What she heard in those few minutes shattered every assumption she'd made about their marriage, and revealed a truth so painful, so raw, that it forced them both to confront the lies they'd been living. This isn't just a story about a marriage falling apart. It's about two people who'd built walls so high they couldn't see each other drowning on opposite sides. And it's about the devastating revelation that sometimes the person you think has given up on you is actually terrified you've given up on them. What Amelia discovered in that accidental message would either destroy them completely or become the wake-up call that saved everything. This is their story. 10 years. That's how long Amelia and Ethan had been married. And somewhere along the way, they'd stopped being a couple and started being roommates. You know that feeling when you're standing right next to someone, but they might as well be on another planet? Yeah, that's where they were. Every morning looked the same. Amelia would wake up first, slip out of bed without disturbing Ethan, and head straight to the kitchen. Coffee, toast, check her phone. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a weighted blanket you can't shake off. Ethan would shuffle in about 20 minutes later, grab his mug without a word, and they'd eat breakfast side by side, scrolling through their phones like strangers at a cafe who happened to sit at the same table. Here's the thing. Nobody tells you about marriage. It doesn't explode. It doesn't crash and burn in some dramatic fireworks show. It fades, slowly, quietly, like a photograph left in the sun too long, all the vibrant colors bleeding out until you're left with something pale and unrecognizable. Amelia used to light up when Ethan walked into a room. She'd tell him about her day, the little victories, the frustrations, the weird thing her coworker said that made her laugh. And he'd listen, really listen, like every word mattered now. Now she'd start a sentence and watch his eyes glaze over, already halfway to somewhere else. So she stopped trying. Why waste your breath when you're talking to a wall? But here's what's wild. At work, Amelia was unstoppable. She'd walk into that office building and transform into this confident, articulate powerhouse who commanded respect. Her presentations? Flawless. Her ideas? Game changers. Colleagues sought her advice. Her boss praised her initiative. She felt seen. She felt valued. She felt alive. Then she'd come home. The moment she'd turn that key in the lock, it's like someone hit a dimmer switch on her soul. The woman who'd just dominated a boardroom full of executives would shrink back into this quieter, smaller version of herself. She'd kick off her heels, change into sweats, and become invisible again. Ethan would be on the couch, laptop open, barely glancing up when she walked in. "Hey," he'd mumble. "Hey," she'd respond. And that would be it. The entirety of their reunion after a full day apart. 2 words exchanged like receipts for a transaction nobody wanted. Dinner was always this weird dance of avoidance. They'd cook together. Well, more like operate in the same kitchen at the same time, moving around each other like choreographed strangers. He'd chop vegetables on one end of the counter while she stirred something on the stove. And they'd somehow manage to not make eye contact for 30 straight minutes. It's actually impressive when you think about it. The effort it takes to avoid someone you're standing 3 feet away from. They'd sit down, plates in front of them, and Amelia would sometimes try. She'd mention something from work or ask about his day, but the responses were always clipped. Short, guarded, like he was conserving words for some future conversation that would never come. So they'd eat in silence, the sound of forks scraping against plates filling the space where laughter used to live. You ever notice how silence has different flavors? There's comfortable silence, the kind you share with someone when words aren't necessary, because the connection is enough. Then there's this silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every second ticking by. The kind that makes you want to scream just to shatter the weight of it. What broke Amelia's heart wasn't the big stuff. It wasn't fights or betrayals or dramatic blow-ups. It was the small moments. The way Ethan would look right through her when she was talking. The way he'd scroll through his phone while she was trying to share something important. The way he'd say, "That's nice in this flat." Automated tone that made it crystal clear he hadn't heard a single word. She'd catch herself sometimes, standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him read or work, And she'd think, when did we become this? When did we stop being us? They still went through the motions, paid bills together, made plans for home repairs, discussed what to have for dinner next Tuesday, all the administrative tasks of a shared life, executed with the enthusiasm of people filling out tax forms. But the warmth, the intimacy, the feeling of being seen and known and chosen, that had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. Here's what's dangerous about this kind of slow fade. You don't notice it happening until you're already drowning. It's not like one day you wake up and suddenly there's a wall between you. It's built brick by brick, conversation by avoided conversation, moment by dismissed moment, until you look up and realize you can't even see each other anymore. Amelia would sometimes think back to their early days, those first years when everything felt electric. When staying up until 3 a.m. talking about nothing and everything seemed like the most important thing in the world. When a random Tuesday felt special just because they were together. When his laugh could light up her entire week. Now she couldn't remember the last time she'd heard him really laugh. Not that polite chuckle he'd offer when someone told a joke at dinner parties, but that deep, genuine laugh that used to make his whole face crinkle up. That laugh that used to make her feel like she'd won the lottery. And the crazy part? She knew Ethan was suffering too. She could see it in the way his shoulders hunched when he came home, the way he'd sometimes start to say something then stop himself, the way he'd look at her when he thought she wasn't watching. This mix of longing and resignation in his eyes, like he wanted to reach out but didn't know how anymore. They'd built this fortress of politeness and routine, and now they were both trapped inside it, calling out to each other but unable to hear through the walls. The worst part about becoming strangers to someone you share a bed with, you still remember what it felt like to be close. You still have these ghost memories of connection haunting you, reminding you of what you've lost. It's like living in a house where every room echoes with laughter you can no longer hear. And so they continued, day after day, week after week, month after month, going to work, coming home, existing in parallel universes that occasionally intersected at the dinner table or in the bathroom mirror. Two people who'd promised forever, now just counting down the hours until they could escape into sleep and pretend tomorrow might be different. But something was about to shift. Something neither of them saw coming, hiding in the mundane routines of an ordinary Tuesday, waiting to crack open everything they thought they understood about their marriage. There are moments in your career that feel like everything you've worked for finally clicks into place. For Amelia, that Tuesday morning presentation was one of those moments. She'd spent weeks preparing, late nights hunched over her laptop, rehearsing in front of the bathroom mirror, tweaking slides until they were perfect. This wasn't just any pitch, this was the pitch. The one that could change the trajectory of her entire career. The clients were big players, the kind who could make or break a company's quarter, and her boss had trusted her to lead the charge. Walking into that conference room, Amelia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. But the second she started talking, something shifted. It was like slipping into a suit of armor made of confidence and competence. Her voice was steady. Her points were sharp. She anticipated questions before they were asked and answered them with this effortless precision that made everyone in the room lean forward. You know that feeling when you're so in the zone that time becomes irrelevant, when every word flows exactly how you need it to, and you can feel the room responding to your energy? That's where Amelia was. She watched the clients nodding, taking notes, exchanging impressed glances. Her colleagues were smiling. Her boss gave her this subtle thumbs up that said, "You're crushing it." When she wrapped up, there was this beat of silence, the good kind. The kind that happens when people need a second to process something impressive. Then the applause started. Not the polite golf clap you get at boring corporate events, but genuine appreciation. The lead client actually stood up to shake her hand, telling her it was one of the best presentations he'd seen in years. Amelia floated out of that conference room, literally felt like her feet weren't touching the ground. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from colleagues. Her boss pulled her aside in the hallway, beaming, talking about promotions and bonuses and opportunities that were about to open up. This was validation. This was proof that she mattered, that her work meant something, that she was capable of extraordinary things. She couldn't wait to tell Ethan. The whole drive home, she was mentally rehearsing how she'd share the news. Maybe they'd open that nice bottle of wine they'd been saving. Maybe they'd actually have a real conversation. The kind they used to have before everything went cold. Maybe this win would be the thing that reminded them both what it felt like to celebrate together. She burst through the front door with more energy than she'd had in months. "Ethan, you're not going to believe what happened today." He was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, and he glanced over his shoulder. "Hey, what's up?" The casualness of his tone should have been her first warning sign, but she was too amped up to notice. She launched into the story, words tumbling out rapid-fire, describing the presentation, the client's reactions, her boss's response, everything. She was talking with her hands, pacing around the kitchen, reliving every victorious moment. Ethan kept stirring, nodding occasionally. His face was neutral, not excited, not engaged. Just there, like he was listening to someone read terms and conditions out loud. "So anyway," Amelia continued, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach, "my boss said this could lead to that promotion we talked about. Can you believe it? All those late nights actually paid off. That's great, Ames." His voice was flat, automatic. The same tone he'd used to say, "Pass the salt." She stopped mid-sentence, just stood there watching him focus on dinner like she'd been telling him about traffic patterns instead of the biggest professional win of her year. Did you hear what I just said? Yeah, you did well in your presentation. That's awesome." He still wasn't looking at her, still just stirring that pot like it contained the secrets of the universe. And just like that, all the air went out of the room. That incredible high she'd been riding crashed into the ground so hard she felt winded. Here she was, practically vibrating with excitement, wanting to share this moment with the one person whose opinion mattered most, and he couldn't even be bothered to turn around and look at her. "Ethan." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "This is kind of a big deal for me. I know." I said, "It's great." He finally turned around, but there was no warmth in his eyes. No pride, no joy for her joy. Just this tired, distant expression that made her feel like she was bothering him. "Dinner's ready in 10 minutes. Amelia felt something crack inside her chest. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just this quiet, devastating realization that the person who was supposed to be her biggest cheerleader couldn't care less about her victories. She thought about her colleagues earlier, how they'd high-fived her in the hallway, how her boss had actually hugged her, something he never did because he was so proud. How even the clients, basically strangers, had shown more enthusiasm for her success than her own husband. They sat down to dinner 20 minutes later. Ethan had made pasta. Nothing special, just something quick and easy. They ate in that familiar suffocating silence that had become their default setting. Amelia pushed food around her plate, that earlier excitement completely extinguished, replaced by this hollow ache that seemed to expand with every passing second. She'd try to bring it up again. Lighter this time, casual, like maybe she'd been too intense earlier. "You know, I think this might mean we could finally take that trip we've been talking about. If the promotion comes through, maybe, we'll see." Ethan cut her off without even looking up from his plate. "We'll see." The universal phrase for "I'm not interested in this conversation." The verbal equivalent of a door closing in your face. Amelia set down her fork. She wasn't hungry anymore. How could she be? She'd just experienced one of the best days of her professional life, and the person who was supposed to love her most had turned it into ashes. His indifference was worse than criticism. At least criticism would have meant he cared enough to have an opinion. She excused herself early, mumbling something about being tired, and retreated to their bedroom. Sat on the edge of the bed staring at nothing, feeling this profound loneliness that's somehow sharper when you're not actually alone. She could hear Ethan in the kitchen loading the dishwasher and wondered if he even noticed she'd left. Later that night, lying next to him in the dark, Amelia replayed the whole day in her mind. The high of the presentation, the crash of coming home, the way her joy had been methodically dismantled by someone who was supposed to protect it. She thought about those couples you see in movies, the ones who pop champagne for each other's wins, who dance in the kitchen when good news arrives, who act like their partner's success is their success too. When had they stopped being that? When had Ethan's default response to her happiness become indifference? When had she started feeling like she needed to apologize for being excited about her own life? The worst part? She knew tomorrow would be the same. She'd wake up, go to work, excel at what she did, and come home to this void where support should be. Success at the office, emptiness at home. Two separate lives running on parallel tracks that never touched. She turned to look at Ethan's back. He was facing away from her, already asleep or pretending to be. The physical distance between them in that bed might have been just a few inches, but it felt like miles, like continents, like entire universes of unspoken pain and disappointment. Amelia closed her eyes, trying to will herself to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to one thought. If the person who's supposed to celebrate you can't even pretend to be happy for you, what exactly are you holding on to? What's the point of sharing a life with someone who makes you feel more alone than being actually alone? She didn't have answers, just questions that kept her awake long after Ethan's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. And a growing sense that something in their marriage had fundamentally broken that night. Maybe not for the first time, but perhaps in a way that would be harder to ignore. Tomorrow, she'd put her professional mask back on and conquer another day at work. But tonight, in the darkness of their shared bedroom, she let herself feel the full weight of what it meant to be married to someone who'd forgotten how to see her. Wednesday started like every other Wednesday. Amelia got to the office early, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the mountain of emails that had piled up overnight. The triumph from yesterday's presentation had already faded into background noise, replaced by the next deadline, the next project, the next thing demanding her attention. She was deep into a spreadsheet when her phone buzzed on her desk. A notification from Ethan. A voice message. That alone was weird. They barely texted during the day, let alone sent voice messages. Maybe he needed her to grab something from the store. Maybe he was finally acknowledging yesterday. She picked up her phone, pressed play, and put it to her ear. What she heard made her blood run cold. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore." Ethan's voice came through, and it was cracked. Broken. Nothing like the flat, distant tone she'd grown accustomed to. This was raw emotion, the kind you can't fake. "I feel like I'm losing her." "No, I feel like I've already lost her and I'm just too scared to admit it." Amelia's hand started shaking. This wasn't meant for her. He'd called his mom Margaret, but somehow the message had been sent to her instead. A technical glitch. A slip of the finger. Divine intervention. Whatever it was, she was hearing something she was never supposed to hear. "I come home every day and it's like walking into a tomb," Ethan continued, and she could hear him trying to keep his voice steady, fighting against the emotion threatening to break through. "She's right there, Mom. Right there in the same room, and I've never felt more alone in my entire life. And the worst part? I know it's my fault. I know I'm the one who's been shutting down, pulling away, but I don't know how to stop." Amelia sat frozen at her desk, her entire world tilting on its axis. Colleagues walked past her cubicle, phones rang in the background, normal office sounds continuing like nothing monumental was happening. But for her, everything had stopped. "I'm terrified." Ethan's voice cracked completely now and she could hear him crying. Actually crying. When was the last time she'd heard him cry? Years, maybe never. "I'm terrified that she doesn't love me anymore. That I've become this obligation she's stuck with. You should see the way she looks at me, Mom, or doesn't look at me. It's like I'm invisible, like I'm just furniture she has to navigate around." A sob escaped Amelia's throat before she could stop it. She pressed her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, trying to stay quiet in the middle of the office while her husband's pain poured through her phone speaker. "I know I haven't been good to her," Ethan continued. "I know I've been cold and distant and all the things I promised I'd never become. But I'm drowning, Mom. I'm drowning and I don't know how to ask for help because what if I reach out and she's not there? What if I finally tell her everything I'm feeling and she tells me she's done? That she's been done for a while now and was just waiting for the right time to leave?" Amelia felt like someone had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. All this time, she'd been interpreting his distance as indifference, as not caring, as him checking out of their marriage because he didn't love her anymore. But he'd been doing the exact same thing. They'd both been drowning separately in the same house, convinced the other person didn't care. Yesterday, she came home so excited about something at work. Ethan's voice dropped lower, filled with regret. "And I couldn't even be happy for her. I wanted to be, Mom. I swear I wanted to. But all I could think was, she's building this whole life that doesn't include me. She's succeeding and thriving and she doesn't need me for any of it. And instead of celebrating with her like a good husband should, I just shut down like I always do, like the coward I've become." The message continued, each word landing like a physical blow. Ethan talked about lying awake at night, watching Amelia sleep. wondering when they'd lost each other. He talked about missing the way she used to laugh at his stupid jokes, about missing the feeling of being her person, the one she'd turn to first with news, with fears, with dreams. He talked about the crushing weight of knowing he'd failed her while simultaneously being too proud or too scared to admit it. "I don't know if we can come back from this," Ethan said quietly, and Amelia heard the resignation in his voice. The defeat. "I don't know if she even wants to anymore. Maybe she's happier without me. Maybe I'm just holding her back from the life she's supposed to have, the life she deserves." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of Ethan trying to collect himself. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I miss her, Mom. I miss my wife. I miss us. And I don't know how to tell her that without sounding pathetic. Without admitting that I'm the one who ruined everything, that I'm the reason our marriage feels like a prison instead of a home." The message ended, just stopped, leaving Amelia sitting there with her phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. Around her, the office continued its normal rhythm. Someone laughed at a joke down the hall, a printer whirred to life. A phone rang and rang and rang, but Amelia couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. All this time she'd been convinced she was the only one suffering, the only one feeling invisible and unloved and trapped in a marriage that had gone cold. She'd been so wrapped up in her own pain, her own interpretation of his behavior, that she'd completely missed his pain. They'd been mirrors of each other, both terrified, both hurting, both convinced the other had stopped caring. How had they gotten here? How had two people who loved each other, because she realized now with stunning clarity that he still loved her and she still loved him, managed to build such impenetrable walls that they couldn't even see each other's suffering? She thought about last night, the way she'd felt so alone lying next to him, staring at his back, convinced he didn't care about her triumph at work. And now she knew he'd been lying there too, probably awake, probably drowning in his own fears about losing her, both of them separated by inches and miles simultaneously. Amelia's coworker, Janet, poked her head into her cubicle. "Hey, are you okay? You look—" She stopped when she saw Amelia's tear-streaked face. "Oh my God, what happened?" "I need to go home," Amelia managed to get out, her voice thick with emotion. I have to go home." She didn't wait for approval. Didn't clock out properly or send explanatory emails. She just grabbed her bag and practically ran to her car, that voice message playing on repeat in her mind. Every word, every broken syllable, every confession that had been meant for someone else but had somehow found its way to her. The drive home was a blur. Red lights, other cars, the normal infrastructure of daily life that suddenly seemed completely irrelevant. She had one thought, one desperate, urgent thought pushing everything else aside. She needed to see Ethan. She needed to look him in the eyes. She needed to tell him everything that voice message had made her understand. Because here's the thing about walls. They can only stay up if both people keep building them. And Amelia was done pretending, done hiding, done letting pride and fear dictate whether her marriage lived or died. She pulled into their driveway with a screech of tires, barely remembering to turn off the engine before bolting to the front door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the lock. The house was quiet. Ethan worked from home on Wednesdays, and she called out his name, her voice cracking with the weight of everything she needed to say. Ethan was at his desk when he heard the front door slam. Not close, slam. The kind of sound that makes your heart jump into your throat because you know something's wrong. He spun around in his chair just as Amelia appeared in the doorway of his home office, and the look on her face stopped him cold. She'd been crying, hard. Her mascara was smudged, her eyes red and swollen, her chest heaving like she'd been running. But it wasn't sadness in her expression. It was something fiercer, something that looked like a mix of devastation and determination and fury all rolled into one. "Amelia, what? Why didn't you talk to me?" The words came out like an accusation, like a plea, like everything she'd been holding back for months finally erupting. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Ethan's confusion must have shown on his face because Amelia held up her phone, her hand shaking. "You sent me a voice message. It was meant for your mom, but you sent it to me instead. And I heard everything, Ethan, every single word." The color drained from his face. Oh God, no. That message, the one where he'd broken down completely, admitting all his fears and failures and the crushing loneliness he'd been drowning in. She'd heard it. She'd heard him at his most vulnerable, most pathetic, most raw. Amelia, He stood up, instinctively backing away like a cornered animal. I didn't mean for you to— Why? She cut him off, and now the tears were flowing freely again. Why did you tell your mother that you think I don't love you anymore? Why did you tell her instead of me? The question hung in the air between them, and Ethan felt something inside him crack wide open. All the walls he'd built, all the protection he'd carefully constructed suddenly felt paper-thin and useless. Because I was scared, he whispered. Because telling you made it real. Made what real? Amelia took a step closer, and there was this desperate edge to her voice. That our marriage is falling apart? Ethan, it's already real. It's been real for months. We've been living like strangers. Like ghosts haunting the same house, I know. His voice broke. God, Amelia, I know. But if I told you, if I said it out loud, then we'd have to deal with it. And I was terrified of what dealing with it would mean. What if we talked and realized we couldn't fix it? What if admitting we had a problem became the thing that ended us? Amelia let out this sound that was half laugh, half sob. So instead you chose to say nothing? To just let us slowly die in silence? I didn't know what else to do. Ethan's voice rose, frustration and fear pouring out. Every time I tried to talk to you, I'd see how successful you were, how much you were thriving, and I'd think, she doesn't need me. She's building this amazing life, and I'm just this anchor weighing her down. Are you kidding me right now? Amelia's eyes flashed with anger. You think I'm thriving? Ethan, I come home every single day feeling like I'm suffocating. Do you have any idea what it's like to achieve something incredible and have your own husband act like you told him about your grocery list? I was trying to protect myself. The confession exploded out of him. Every time you came home excited about work, all I could think was, that's where her real life is. That's where she matters. And I'm just the guy she's stuck coming home to. The obligation, the disappointment. You think you're the disappointment? Amelia's voice went quiet, which somehow felt more intense than the yelling. Ethan, I have spent months convinced that you didn't love me anymore. That I'd become this burden you were too polite to get rid of. Do you understand what that does to a person? To feel invisible to the one person who's supposed to see you. They were both crying now, standing in his home office with years of unspoken pain finally spilling out between them. The afternoon light filtered through the window, casting long shadows, and for the first time in forever, they were actually looking at each other. Really looking. I miss you, Ethan said, his voice raw and broken. I miss you so much it physically hurts. I miss talking to you. I miss making you laugh. I miss feeling like I was your person. And I don't know when we stopped being us, but I'm terrified that we can't find our way back. Amelia wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold together something that was breaking apart. You were pushing me away. Every single day you were pushing me away. How was I supposed to fight for us when you wouldn't even let me in? Because I'm an idiot. Ethan's hands went to his head, frustration with himself evident in every gesture. Because I'm a coward who was too proud to admit I was struggling. Too scared to be vulnerable. Too convinced that showing weakness would make you respect me less. Respect you less? Amelia's voice cracked. Ethan, I would have respected you more. I would have killed for you to be honest with me. To tell me you were hurting instead of just disappearing. There was this moment of silence where they both just stood there, breathing hard, the weight of everything finally out in the open. No more pretending, no more polite distance, just two people who'd been suffering separately, finally seeing each other's pain. I heard what you said to your mom, Amelia said quietly, about lying awake at night watching me sleep, wondering when we lost each other. You want to know something? I do the same thing. I lie there staring at your back, feeling more alone than I've ever felt in my life, convinced you're relieved to be facing away from me. Ethan made this sound like he'd been punched. God, Amelia, we've been doing the exact same thing. We've both been drowning and neither of us thought to just reach out. Because reaching out is terrifying, she said. Because what if you reach and the other person isn't there? What if you're vulnerable and they use it against you? What if you admit you're struggling and they tell you they're done? Are you? Ethan asked, and his voice was so small, so afraid. Done? Amelia looked at him. Really looked at him for what felt like the first time in months. She saw the fear in his eyes. The exhaustion, the hope fighting against resignation. She saw the man she'd married, the one who'd gotten buried under layers of self-protection and misunderstanding. No, she said finally. and watched relief flood his face. But I can't keep living like this, Ethan. I can't keep tiptoeing around the crater in the middle of our marriage pretending it's not there. We have to fix this or we have to admit we can't. I want to fix it. The words came out fast, desperate. I want to fix us. I don't know how, but I want to try. I'm sorry I shut you out. I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. I'm sorry I was too scared to just tell you I was scared. Amelia felt fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm sorry, too. I'm sorry I interpreted your distance as not caring. I'm sorry I stopped trying to reach you. I'm sorry we let it get this bad before either of us said something. They stood there, separated by maybe 6 feet of office space, but something had shifted. The wall between them, the one they'd both been building brick by brick, had its first crack. Not a collapse. Not a demolition. Just a hairline fracture that let a sliver of light through. I don't know what happens now, Ethan admitted. I don't know how to fix years of damage in one conversation. Maybe we start with the truth, Amelia said. Maybe we start with actually talking to each other instead of assuming we know what the other person is thinking. Ethan nodded, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm scared we don't know how to do that anymore. Me too. Amelia's voice was soft but steady. But I'm more scared of not trying. They moved toward each other slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust their footing on unstable ground. When they finally embraced, it was tentative at first, both of them afraid the other might pull away. But then Ethan's arms tightened around her, and Amelia buried her face in his chest, and for the first time in forever, they weren't just going through the motions, they were holding each other like they meant it. They stood like that for a long time, crying into each other's shoulders, releasing months of accumulated pain and fear and loneliness. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't a solution. But it was a start. A tiny, fragile beginning. That night, after the tears had dried and they'd both calmed down enough to think straight, Amelia and Ethan did something they hadn't done in years. They sat down and actually talked. Not the surface-level administrative kind of talking about bills and schedules. Real talking. The vulnerable, uncomfortable, necessary kind. They decided on a rule. 15 minutes every night, no phones, no TV, no distractions. Just them, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, learning how to communicate again. It sounded simple, laughably simple even, but simple doesn't mean easy. That first night was brutal. They sat there in awkward silence for what felt like an eternity, both of them waiting for the other to start, neither knowing what to say. How do you begin rebuilding when you don't even remember what the foundation used to look like? Remember our second date? Ethan finally said, and Amelia looked up surprised. We went to that awful Italian restaurant where the waiter spilled wine all over your dress? Despite everything, Amelia felt herself smile. And you gave me your jacket even though you were wearing a white shirt and it was freezing outside. I was trying to impress you, Ethan admitted. Ended up with pneumonia the next week. Totally worth it, though. And just like that, they found their way in. Through memories. Through the people they used to be before life got complicated and fear took over. They talked about their first apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and neighbors who fought at 2 a.m. About their wedding day, when Ethan's best man lost the rings and they had to use pieces of string for the ceremony. About the small, stupid, beautiful moments that had built their relationship before they'd forgotten to keep building. But here's the thing about healing. You can't just live in the past. You have to deal with the present too. And the present was messy and painful and full of landmines they'd been avoiding for way too long. On the third night, Amelia brought up something that had been eating at her. Why did you stop touching me? Her voice was quiet, but the question landed heavy. Not even in a sexual way, just, you stopped reaching for my hand. Stopped hugging me goodbye. Stopped existing in my physical space. Ethan flinched like she'd slapped him. I thought you didn't want me to. Every time I'd try, you'd stiffen up or pull away, so I just stopped trying. I only pulled away because you'd been distant for so long, Amelia said. By the time you'd try to touch me, it felt forced. Like you were going through the motions because you thought you should, not because you wanted to. That's not... Ethan stopped himself, really thinking about it. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe I was going through the motions. But it's because I'd convinced myself you didn't want me anymore. That touching you would just remind us both of how disconnected we'd become. See, this is what they hadn't understood before. They'd been creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. He pulled away because he thought she wanted space. She pulled away because he'd been distant. Round and round in this toxic cycle, both of them responding to the other's behavior without ever checking if their interpretations were actually accurate. "We have to stop assuming," Amelia said. "We have to start asking. If I'm upset, you need to ask me why instead of guessing. If you're hurting, you need to tell me instead of shutting down." Ethan nodded, but his face showed the struggle. "That's scary, though. Asking means risking the answer. What if I ask you what's wrong and you tell me something I can't fix? Then we deal with it together," Amelia said firmly. "That's what marriage is supposed to be. It's not about fixing each other. It's about facing life together instead of alone." They started small. Ethan began telling her when work stressed him out instead of bottling it up until he exploded. Amelia started sharing her fears about her career instead of pretending everything was perfect. They learned to say, "I'm struggling," instead of "I'm fine." 3 words that felt impossibly hard at first but got easier with practice. But old habits die hard, and they found that out the painful way about 2 weeks into their new routine. Amelia came home late one night, a legitimate work emergency. Nothing she could control, and found Ethan sitting in the dark living room. The energy was immediately off. She could feel his anger radiating across the room before he even spoke. "Must have been some emergency," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. 3 hours late and not even a text. And just like that, they were right back in their old pattern. Amelia felt her defenses slam up, ready to fight. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" "I was in a meeting with clients. I couldn't exactly. You couldn't take 30 seconds to send a message?" Ethan stood up, and there was that familiar wall rebuilding itself in real time. "Or were you just hoping I wouldn't notice? Wouldn't care? Like always?" "Like always?" Amelia's voice went sharp. What's that supposed to mean? They were seconds away from a full-blown fight. The kind they'd had dozens of times before, where they'd throw accusations like grenades, both trying to hurt each other as much as they were hurting themselves. Where they'd go to bed angry and wake up to cold silence and pretend it never happened. But something shifted. Maybe it was the memory of that voice message. Maybe it was the 2 weeks of actually trying. Maybe it was just exhaustion at the thought of doing this dance again. Ethan stopped mid-sentence, just stopped, took a breath, and instead of launching another attack, he said something that changed everything. "I'm scared." Amelia blinked. "What?" "I'm scared," he repeated, and his voice cracked. "When you didn't come home and didn't text, all I could think was she's not coming back. She's finally had enough and she's not coming back. And instead of telling you that, I was about to pick a fight because that's what I do. I get scared and I attack." The anger drained out of Amelia like someone had pulled a plug. She dropped her bag and walked over to him. "Ethan, I was in a meeting. That's all. I'm sorry I didn't text. I should have. But I wasn't leaving you. I'm not leaving you." He pulled her into a hug and she felt him shaking. "I know that logically. But my brain goes to the worst place. It tells me I'm losing you, and instead of asking if that's true, I just react." "Okay," Amelia said against his chest. "So next time, instead of assuming the worst, ask me. Say, hey, when you're late without texting, it makes me anxious. Don't attack. Don't accuse. Just tell me what you're feeling. And you'll do the same." Ethan pulled back to look at her. "When I do something that hurts you, you'll tell me instead of shutting down." "I'll try," Amelia said honestly. "I can't promise I'll always get it right. But I'll try." And that became their new mantra, "I'll try." Not "I'll be perfect." Not "I'll never mess up." Just "I'll try." Because that's all anyone can really do. They started instituting other small rituals. Coffee together in the morning, even if it was just 10 minutes. A kiss goodbye that actually meant something. Asking about each other's day and really listening to the answer. Holding hands while watching TV. That simple physical connection reminding them both that they were in this together. It wasn't always smooth. There were nights when one of them would slip back into old patterns. When Ethan would shut down or Amelia would interpret silence as rejection. But now they had tools. They had their 15-minute talks. They had the agreement to ask instead of assume. They had the understanding that marriage isn't about never fighting. It's about learning to fight fair. One night, about a month into their new normal, they were lying in bed and Amelia said something that had been on her mind. "I think we needed this. The breakdown, the confrontation, all of it. I think we needed to hit rock bottom to remember why we built this in the first place." Ethan turned to look at her in the darkness. You think we would have made it if you hadn't accidentally gotten that voice message? Amelia thought about it. Really thought about it. Honestly, I don't know. I think we might have just kept drifting until one day we looked up and realized we were strangers who happened to share a mortgage. That's a terrifying thought. Yeah, Amelia agreed. But we're not there now. We're here. We're trying. That counts for something. Ethan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. It counts for everything. They still had a long way to go. Years of damage don't heal in a few weeks of good intentions. But for the first time in forever, they were moving in the right direction. Together. Not perfectly. Not without stumbles. But together. Theory is beautiful. Intentions are noble. But life has this way of testing you right when you think you've got things figured out. And for Amelia and Ethan, that test came fast and hard. About 6 weeks into their renewed commitment to each other, Amelia's biggest project at work, the one she'd been pouring her soul into for 3 months, crashed and burned spectacularly. The client pulled out last minute, citing budget concerns, and just like that, all her effort evaporated. Worse, her boss wasn't happy. There was talk of restructuring, whispers about performance reviews, the kind of corporate speak that makes your stomach drop because you know what it really means. She left the office that Friday, feeling like she'd been run over by a truck. Every step toward her car felt heavier than the last. This was the kind of failure that made you question everything. Your competence, your worth, your entire career trajectory. The old Amelia would have driven home, put on a brave face, and pretended everything was fine until the weight of it crushed her alone in the bathroom. But when she got to the parking lot, there was Ethan, leaning against her car, hands in his pockets, looking nervous. Like he wasn't quite sure if showing up was the right move, but did it anyway. "What are you doing here?" Amelia asked, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Janet texted me," Ethan said. Janet, her co-worker, the one who'd witnessed her breakdown the day of the voice message. "She said you might need someone today." Amelia felt her composure cracking. The project fell apart, all of it. 3 months of work just gone. Ethan didn't say anything. Didn't try to fix it or minimize it or offer empty platitudes about how everything happens for a reason. He just walked over and pulled her into a hug right there in the parking lot, and Amelia broke down completely. Sobbed into his jacket while other employees walked past to their cars, not caring who saw, just letting herself feel all of it. "I don't want to go home," she mumbled against his chest. "I don't want to sit in that house and think about how I failed." "Then we won't." Ethan pulled back to look at her. "Let's just walk, anywhere, nowhere, let's just walk," and they did. They left both cars in the parking lot and walked through downtown, not talking much, just being together. Ethan held her hand the entire time, and whenever Amelia would start to spiral into self-blame, he'd squeeze her fingers gently, reminding her she wasn't alone. They ended up at this small park they used to visit when they first got married. Back when they were broke and a walk in the park was their idea of a fancy date. They sat on a bench as the sun set, and Ethan said something that surprised her. "You know what I learned from my dad?" he started. "He told me once that you can't measure a person by their successes. You measure them by how they handle failure, by whether they get back up, by whether they let one bad day define them or just become part of their story." Amelia looked at him. "When did your dad tell you that?" "The day I got fired from my first real job." Ethan smiled sadly. "I thought my life was over. Thought I'd never recover. He took me to a bar, bought me a beer, and told me that failure is just information. It tells you what doesn't work so you can figure out what does." "I don't feel very philosophical about it right now," Amelia admitted. "I just feel like garbage." "Then feel like garbage," Ethan said simply. "You're allowed. You don't have to be strong or positive or any of that toxic positivity nonsense. Sometimes things suck. Sometimes you fail, and it's okay to acknowledge that it hurts." That's what the old version of their marriage had been missing. The permission to not be okay. The space to be human and flawed and struggling without fear of judgment. Ethan wasn't trying to fix her pain or talk her out of it. He was just sitting next to her in it, letting her know she didn't have to carry it alone. They walked home eventually. It took almost 2 hours, but neither of them minded. When they got there, Ethan ordered pizza because neither of them felt like cooking, and they ate it on the living room floor like they used to do in their first apartment. No fancy table setting, no pretense. Just them, a pizza box, and the understanding that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is just show up. But here's where it gets real. Their new commitment wasn't just tested by big failures. It was tested by the mundane, everyday stuff that's actually harder to navigate. Like the morning Ethan forgot to take out the trash again, and Amelia felt that familiar irritation bubbling up. The old her would have let it fester, adding it to the growing list of resentments. The new her? She said it out loud. Hey, the trash thing is actually bothering me. Can we figure out a system? Simple, direct, no passive aggression, no silent treatment. Just honest communication that led to Ethan setting a reminder on his phone and actually following through. Or the night Amelia was stressed about an upcoming presentation and snapped at Ethan for something trivial. Instead of shutting down, he called her on it. I know you're stressed, but I'm not the enemy here. Talk to me instead of at me, she apologized. They talked about her anxiety. He helped her practice her presentation. The whole interaction took maybe 15 minutes, but it was 15 minutes of choosing connection over conflict. They started instituting little rituals that kept them anchored. Sunday morning waffles became sacred. No work, no phones, just them in the kitchen making a mess and laughing about how neither of them could flip a waffle without it falling apart. They'd planned date nights, but here's the twist. They didn't have to be fancy. Sometimes it was just driving to a new neighborhood and exploring. Sometimes it was watching a movie in their pajamas. The point wasn't the activity. It was the intentionality, the choice to prioritize each other. One rainy Tuesday, they were supposed to go out for dinner, but the weather was awful. Oldham would have canceled, gone to separate corners of the house, let the night dissolve into more of the same isolation. Knew them? They made it work differently. Ethan put on music, the playlist from their wedding reception. Amelia lit candles. They made pasta together, dancing in the kitchen while the rain hammered against the windows, and it felt like falling in love all over again. Not in the easy, effortless way of the beginning, but in this deeper, harder-earned way that comes from choosing someone even when it's difficult. You know what's wild? Amelia said as they slow danced between the stove and the refrigerator. We almost lost this. We were so close to just giving up. Ethan pulled her closer. I think we had to almost lose it to remember what it was worth. And that became their truth. Love isn't something that just happens and then sustains itself forever. Love is a choice. A daily, conscious, sometimes exhausting choice to show up for each other, to communicate instead of assume, to fight fair instead of fighting dirty, to celebrate wins together and sit in losses together. They weren't perfect. They still had bad days, still had moments where old patterns would creep back in. But now they had something they didn't have before: awareness. They could catch themselves sliding into old habits and course correct. They could say, hey, we're doing that thing again, and laugh about it instead of letting it spiral. 3 months into their renewed commitment, they were having their nightly 15-minute talk. And Ethan said something that made Amelia's heart skip. I want to renew our vows. Amelia looked up, surprised. Really? Yeah. Ethan's expression was serious. Not like a big wedding or anything, just us. Maybe at that park where we had our first date. I want to make those promises again, but this time knowing what they actually mean, knowing what it takes to keep them. Amelia felt tears welling up, the good kind this time. I'd like that, because here's what they'd learned. Marriage isn't about the wedding day. It's not about the perfect proposal or the romantic gestures that look good in photos. Marriage is about the unglamorous work of showing up every single day, even when, especially when, it's hard. It's about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. It's about building something together that's stronger than the sum of its parts. They planned it for a Sunday morning, just the two of them, and a friend to officiate. Standing in that park where they'd sat on that bench after Amelia's project failed, where Ethan had shown up when she needed him most, they made new promises. Not naive ones. Not ones based on the fairy tale version of love that ignores the hard parts. They promised to keep talking, even when silence felt safer. To keep showing up even when disappointment felt inevitable. To keep choosing each other, over and over in big ways and small. To remember that love isn't found, it's built. Brick by brick, conversation by conversation, choice by choice. As they walked away from that park, hands intertwined, Amelia thought about how close they'd come to becoming another statistic. Another couple who let their marriage die not in a dramatic explosion, but in the quiet erosion of connection. And she thought about that accidental voice message, the technical glitch that had saved them by forcing honesty, Neither of them had been brave enough to volunteer. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes the universe intervenes, but most of the time love survives because you fight for it, because you decide that the person next to you is worth the work, worth the discomfort, worth the vulnerability. And as they made their way home, planning to make those Sunday waffles and probably burn half of them, Amelia knew with absolute certainty they were worth it. This messy, imperfect, hard-won love was worth every single moment. So here's the question that really matters. How many marriages are dying right now in silence? How many couples are lying next to each other at night, both convinced the other person doesn't care anymore, both too scared to reach out first? Amelia and Ethan were seconds away from becoming another statistic, another couple who let pride and fear destroy what they'd built together. But they got lucky. That accidental voice message forced a conversation they'd been avoiding for years. Most of us won't get that kind of wake-up call. Most of us will keep building walls, keep assuming the worst, keep choosing silence over vulnerability until one day we wake up next to a stranger and wonder where it all went wrong. Here's what this story should teach you. Your partner can't read your mind. They can't fix problems they don't know exist. And that distance you feel, that coldness, there's a solid chance they're feeling it too. Interpreting your behavior the exact same way you're interpreting theirs. Both of you drowning separately while sharing the same space. So ask yourself, when's the last time you had a real conversation with your partner? Not about bills or schedules or who's picking up the kids. A real conversation about fears, about needs, about whether you're both happy or just going through the motions. When's the last time you chose vulnerability over self-protection? Because love doesn't save itself. It doesn't survive on autopilot. It requires intention, honesty, and the courage to be uncomfortable. Amelia and Ethan almost lost everything because they were too scared to admit they were scared. Don't make that same mistake. Your marriage is either growing or dying. There's no neutral. So what are you choosing today? Silence or honesty? Assumption or communication? The wall or the bridge? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships and the walls you might be building, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We share stories like this every week. Real stories about real people navigating the messy, beautiful complexity of human connection. Stories that might just give you the perspective you need to save what matters most. Don't let your story end in silence. Choose differently. Choose better. Choose today.